Welcome to the Touching into Presence podcast.
This podcast is for people who are interested in bodywork, empowerment, and somatic-based practices.
I am Nikki Olson.
I'm Andrew Rosenstock.
We are certified Rolfers.
Collectively, we're trained in various movement and bodywork therapies with an emphasis on somatic awareness and client resilience.
Through conversations, our goal is to share and explore mind-body paradigms to offer empowerment possibilities.
We're grateful to be in conversation with Carol Agneessens. Carol began training at the Rolf Institute in 1981. She has been in private practice for 38 years. In addition to Rolfing, her practice includes cranial sacral therapy and movement. In 2019, she resigned from the Rolf Institute faculty after teaching basic, advanced, and Rolf movement trainings for many years. She's the author of one of my favorite books, The Fabric of Wholeness. A desire to gain a deeper understanding of the cranium beyond seventh-hour dynamics led her to an in-depth study of the cranial sacral system and embryology. With her colleague, Ray McCall, she teaches foundational trainings in cranial sacral therapy. In today's talk, we dive straight into antiracism, somatics, our cellular cultural imprints, Carol's history with the Rolf Institute and how her movement and structural work evolved into biodynamic craniosacral and embryology work, and where it's unfolding now. We'll talk a little bit about yield and a lot more. So with that, let's begin our talk.
Hi.
Hi, Carol.
Hi, Andrew.
Carol, it's nice to meet you via Zoom.
You too.
We're both really excited to have you on. I mean, I did my phase 3 with Ray, so your name would come up, and a few people in my training had either started or were going to start the cranial training with you and Ray. So
Right.
I'd heard your name, but I don't remember. I think I found your book a lot earlier. I don't remember when or how, but I found your book, and it was just like finding gold. It was like, this is a lot of what I've been working with, feeling with, connecting with, but hadn't had the words to say. And I just finished about a month ago reading the eco-psychology book that you quoted a lot from, that the Laura Sewell book. That book is amazing.
Which one is that? Remind me.
The eco-psychology of perception.
Oh, yes. That's good.
Oh, it's
Sounds
so
like
good.
a good one.
Yeah.
Because your whole kind of the title for this is, touching into presence.
Mm-hmm.
So that eco-psychology book, because truly right now we are touching into presence in such a chaotic time.
Mm.
We're really being assaulted on every level of our ability to be with ourselves and to hold some kind of sanity within ourselves as everything is dismantled around us, from the climate. We just went through a number of fires here in California. I have friends who've lost their homes, to the racism that's going on, to the women's movement, and with the loss of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, women's rights, reproductive rights are so important. So as much as I'll talk about, how I got here, I also feel it's really important to bring this into a perspective of today. And what's exciting me right now is this group of structural integrators begun by Paul Worth, who's an advanced Rolfer, and Ryan Horfer, to really look at antiracism somatics. And that they initiated that after George Floyd's death. And there's about 8 people, including me, who are a core group of this. Mm-hmm. And it's really been powerful in looking at what imprints culturally do I carry in my own system, And how does that affect? So we'll be launching a website. Paul is a techno genius, called Liberation Somatics.
Ooh, I like this.
Ooh. Let me tell you, this group is really amazing. And because of what we're all being asked to stand for, literally to stand in solidarity with our sisters and brothers of color, this is a really important piece for body workers to also acknowledge.
Body work, at least, is predominantly by whites for whites.
For whites.
So how do you take it beyond that? How do you breach that and bring it to is by all people for all people?
And that's what we're looking at too, is how do we, and I think it begins with deconstructing literally the understanding of what white colonialism is within my own body, that imprint. And then, which has an attitude of arrogance and superiority, because remember, our country was founded on genocide and racism. That's what it was founded on. So how do I begin to really differentiate those learned beliefs that are so deep? It's like looking under rocks. It's like the thing about body work is that it is a portal. You never have to be bored. Really, that's the edge I'm riding right now, because it's movement. And, there are many people who say our bodies are not just a structure. We are a process. We are a verb. Buckminster Fuller says we are a verb. So this process of really beginning to look at how our whiteness and the roots of that, and begin to deconstruct and learn, where is it in my own system that I still hold these imprints? They're cultural imprints. Studying movement. I actually began at the Rolf Institute in 1981 studying. They had the movement training first. You could take movement training without taking the Rolfing training. So I took the movement training first, and I was so lucky. I had the context. Again, we're looking at what's going on in the field around you. And you have to realize that in the 70s, late 60s, 70s, to the mid 80s, it was about how do you enrich yourself? What is self-actualization? And how does it, and you had this constellation of brilliance from Dr. Rolf, Lulu Schweigart, Charlotte Silver, Fritz Perls, Moshe Feldenkrais, all of them coming together and creating this human potential movement. And part of that human potential was the body. And, and so all of these techniques seem to just come together and burst forward. It was such an exciting time. So the Rolf Institute at that time was known as the Bodywork School, the Mystery School of Bodywork. So that's where a lot of us began, in early 80s, 1981. And it was in the little Pearl Street, 302 Pearl Street, which is, I think now a dispensary. And anyway, that's kind of funny. So, but that's where it began. And I thought, oh, what a sacred place, for a sacred herb. It's like, but that's where it began, this little tiny house. And yet, when I finally found Rolfing in Seattle, Washington, it was like, it changed my world. So I expected it to be a huge place. There's this little tiny house on Pearl Street with emerald green carpeting. Anyway, lots of fun. And so that whole process of where we began in this human potential movement. And Esalen flowed from that time. Peter Melchior, Jan Sultan were all students of Dr. Rolf down in Esalen. It was an exciting time to be part of this. And then I took the Rolfing training, which was so valuable for me. And having had a number of car accidents and other incidents, Rolfing just really changed my life. That's great. Any question?
You went on a roll. That was awesome.
So I'll just keep going.
Yeah, please.
Yeah.
This is
so my
beautiful.
early teachers were Emmett Hutchins. In the movement training, we would take the morning with Emmett and the afternoon in movement. And then for my practicing in Rolfing, it was Peter Melchior and Ron McCall and Jim Asher and those people. And Betsy Seiss, who was probably one of the few women who was assisting at that time. And that was just such a treat to have her.
Can you talk a little bit about that influence? Because, the Rolf Institute in the early days definitely was pretty male dominant. I'm curious that what is the female energy like? Especially, again, stories that we hear from Ida kind of probably leaned a little bit more on the masculine.
Yes.
So then to have a female
assistant.
Yeah.
Well, it was a very large class, and I was very grateful that Betsy was there. It wasn't until I belonged to the board of directors early on in 86, 87, 88, might have been 89 too, but I remember at one specific conference, which was held at the Boulderado, they finally said, because the women were saying, hey, where are the teachers? And they finally said, we're opening it up to teachers now, to women teachers. So, you still had to go through all of the assisting and all of that. But they finally, that wasn't until probably 1988 that they began to really bring forward women. Yeah, because before you had to weigh at least 160 pounds. And remember, you had to put the quarter on the palm of your hand, and they had to see if your hand was big enough in relationship to that quarter. So
we had Judith Aston on not too long ago, and she was sharing a little bit of her story of paving her way as a tiny but bold, strong woman
she's wonderful.
Yeah.
She's absolutely wonderful. I took a training with her, a 3-day in Seattle 2 years ago. I really enjoyed. I just really wanted to meet and to be with kind of a root of this whole movement curriculum. She was very much at the beginning, very creative. So after, Rolfing, I've been lucky to have a very full practice, and wherever I lived, and I lived along a lot of different places. But I started studying some cranial sacral therapy because I felt like I just didn't understand enough about the cranium. And so some of the first classes were with, I mentored with an upledger teacher, but I couldn't move the bones. It felt too invasive to move bones on the cranium. And it wasn't until I saw a flyer from Tom Shaver, who was is an osteopath in Japan or Hawaii now, that he talked about liquid light. So it was that's what I've been looking for. This liquid light within the cerebral spinal fluid that moves the bones. And so I spent some time studying with him and Ron Murray, who's a very wonderful cranial teacher. He teaches other things too, but he is very good at that. And Jim Asher, I've taken classes with him. So it's this movement. And as I started going into more of the cranial sacral work, reading the work of Andrew Taylor Still and how the work with this fluidity and the membranes, how that really began to change my structure even more and resolve some of the issues I had with migraines and that, you know. So I highly recommend really beginning to understand this flow of the cranial sacral system. It's extremely valuable to know and to understand that it's not just about moving bones, but it's these membranes that also are really at the root of some issues, and feeling that through the body and learning to listen to the system rather than perhaps just apply a protocol. So that study, and both Ron Murray and Tom Shaver really brought in a lot of embryology, and that triggered an interest for some reason in me. I was also caring for my mother at the time, who I took care of for a number of years. And just knowing the embryology and knowing the whole understanding of implantation and what happens at implantation, that when she was literally in her dying process, it was like we were in this bubble of love. And I felt like that sense of implantation and her moving into her other, the beyond, and me finally really sensing mother within myself was just this embryological beginning for me. I now teach a lot of the embryology in the cranial classes because it's how we come into formation. So what Emmett, going back to Emmett Hutchins, he presented something about the lemniscate. This lemniscate, which is the infinity sign. Okay. And I've gotten validation from Ron that lemniscate is actually the shape of formation in the bones, in the cranium, in the body. And that movement, when that begins to appear into your hands, you're really touching like almost the time lapse of beginning. This is how we come into formation, from outside to inside, from inside to outside. And that flow of formation shapes us. So when I feel a shoulder girdle that just feels discombobulated and not in place, after I've worked with the muscles and tendons, when the system begins to show me that lemniscate-like movement within itself, that very quiet movement, then I know that something deeper has settled. There's something deeper that's going on and integrating into the system, whether it's someone's neck or zygoma or temporal bone. There are lemniscate-like motions that begin to show themselves to your hands, to my hands, as different issues begin to resolve in someone's system. And this is what I've studied in for a while now, and it's an intrigue. This shaping that goes on, and these shapes are also in nature. Whether we're looking at a tree, you see the spirals, you see the movement within a leaf, how the stems grow in spirals, and these movements that are in nature are also in our bodies. We are not linear. In fact, I remember asking Emmett, how do you touch muscles that are so spiraling in their formation and they're not linear muscles? How do you let your hand shape to them? And so it's been a question. It's been an interest for a long time.
Well, speaking how fluid oriented you are, I'm curious if you could talk a little bit more about the umbilical area. I watched or listened to a previous podcast of yours, and that definitely sparked my interest because after having 2 children, I ended up getting an umbilical hernia. And so my whole world of trying to figure out my core again, and this hernia, I've never had a hernia before. So, yeah, I'm just really curious. And also with back pain. So definitely I've kind of been in this curiosity, but then hearing you, who has been so well into this, I'm like, ooh.
Well, the first thing
curious.
I'm always curious in beginning interviews, what was your birth like? Was it a forceps birth? Was it a breech birth? Was it a vaginal birth? How was your mother during these things? So
how my birth was versus how I delivered my children?
I want to know both. So your birth?
My birth, I was induced.
Induced, okay.
And this was 43 years ago, and my mom was done with me being inside of her and was like, get this kid out. So there I was. And then ironically, with my births, I wanted to have I was always planning to deliver in a hospital. That felt like a comfortable setting for me. Yeah. But I wanted to try to do it drug-free. But my first kid, I ended up having to induce. He was 41 weeks and then starting showing signs of stress, which was not we was easygoing, still a very easygoing kid. But so I tried to do an epidural free birth with him. But then after a while with that Pitocin, I was like 7 hours later and not dilating. I'm like, all right, give it to me. And then voila, I actually becoming because being a Rolfer in the wellness industry, blah, 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 people are thinking you're going to be like the mama birthing at home, herbs and stuff. And then my second one, I was going to try to have a natural birth with him. I hate calling it natural because I think birthing is however way it happens is natural. Yeah. A drug-free delivery, I was hoping with my second kid, but no, he has a kidney disease and I ended up delivering at Children's Hospital and had a C-section. And I had a dual with me with both of them. And I loved my deliveries. As weird as it may seem and as medical and invasive it was, I felt so loved and supported. And it's a weird, and I really like an epidural. I'm not going to lie. Being in that space of I'm fully conscious, I'm fully aware of what's going on, and I can't feel half of my body. It was kind of, granted, I have a brother who's quadriplegic, so I think there's a little piece of this is what my brother feels like. But that's how I came in the world, and that's how I brought 2 lovely beings into the world.
So have you had a surgery for the umbilical hernia?
No. Okay. No, I've seen 2 surgeons about it. One was a very kind of crassy type doctor, and was, let's open you up and throw some mesh on it. And I'm like, I don't know if that's the approach I want. Yeah. So I just sat with it for a while because it doesn't really bother me. But then I went and saw a woman who does do umbilical surgeries without mesh. But the problem with me is because of my rectus diastasis, there's no tissue for this to grab on. So for me, if I wanted to do a non-mesh surgery, it's pretty invasive. It's pretty full on. Like go in, sew up the linea alba, and then fix the hernia. Mm-hmm. And I'm still wondering if I want to do that. I don't love the way it looks, but whatever. It's whatever. I'm a fully outie than before I had really strong inner belly button. But the only thing that I'm a little wondering about, because I guess smaller hernias are more at risk, more dangerous, because the adipose or a wrist or whatever visceral, there's ability for it to slip through the hole and then strangulate, versus a larger hernia tissue can move in and out.
Yes. Yeah.
So I'm just sitting with it. Of course, I wasn't going to do, my youngest is 3 years old, so it's still not a very convenient time to be laid up for a while. Mm-hmm. So yeah, and also I wanted to give it more time to see what I could do to bring more function to my linea alba, and just kind of give it time and see what happens. Yeah. But I don't want to be ignorant and avoid surgery just because, and then end up with a bigger problem. So right. I'm just still pondering and doing my research, but yeah. So with that, I would love to hear your insight. And
well, I'll tell you, I have a skeleton here. So, you just know where the third, fourth lumbar vertebrae are, and the umbilicus sits kind of right above that. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of always my landmarks for any kind of umbilical work. And there's always, in any kind of stress situation, especially umbilical stress, it's not just in the body, it's also above the body. There's literally, you can feel the tension or the stress or the concern that sometimes is, if I was holding up here around L4-5, L3-4, this whole area, you're really working with what is the pull that's going on and the tensions that sometimes are within, but also just how do you guard, if you do, this part of your system? Do you tend to guard it or hold it, or, so I would be curious about what's also happening above your body, kind of off body, and how that whole context is feeding into any kind of low back pain and stress, because it's all part of one system. So whether it's the knowing that little that there may be more herniation that can happen, you do want to be careful of not letting that intestine strangulate. It's really important. But there is more than just what's happening between your skin body. There's also stress that can be held above the body, and it's literally an umbilical stress that you can feel. And sometimes that helps to settle it. And you can also begin to work with making those connections from your low back, because the legs begin around L4-5, and how also getting that whole process of connection down through the legs to support what's going on at the umbilical level. But it's within your system, and it's also maybe some tensions held literally above the navel area.
Well, for sure. I mean, I also have scoliosis that I've had since I was a kid. So
that may be tied into the scoliosis.
Yeah, I think there's a whole journey in that one.
Yeah.
But I'm curious again. I would love to talk about myself this podcast, but I don't think the audience would care for that. So, but I'm again curious too, if you could talk more about the fluidity and the connection that you had with the umbilical and the viscera, and I'm really also in this whole fluid medium with alignment.
Yes.
And I'm just really enjoying that dance. I'm also in a very somatic studies right now. So it's been fun with having the Rolfing very structural 10 series, the recipe, and and I have Rolf movement background and stuff, but then this whole other add-on, I'm in a fascinated stage with that, and I really am curious to hear.
Well, it's kind of like has to do with how you come into contact, how you begin to touch. And so if I'm going in and my orientation is just to touch the muscle, and you dive into whatever somebody is complaining about, that's one way. And that sometimes that works. But what I'm curious about is what are the layers between my hand coming into connection with somebody, and how do I literally not go in, but hold this space of listening first, so that their system begins to come out to meet me. And when I am able to make that connection, how they're contacting me and showing me what's going on, the entanglement, the confusion. Like there may be a lot of confusion around your navel, in, out, all the history that's there. So it's like, how do my hands become ears, literally, to listen to their system? So I don't presuppose that I know what's best for you, but I listen to what your system is asking for. And I find this so much in working with women, especially with menstrual problems, menstrual cramps, pregnancies, surgeries, that there is often this place where, wow, I can't differentiate anything. So what's most important is for my hands to learn to listen to their system and listen and acknowledge the confusion or the held history that's there. And when I take my attention off the palm of my hand, knowing, and I move it to the back of my hand, so I'm not touching just full-on palm or fingers, I'm also very aware of the back of my hand. More of their system begins to communicate to me. I begin to listen at a different level. And in that listening, there's a fluidity. It's almost like there's a permission for their system not to just be worked on, but to be listened to and to be heard. And that seems to allow, the level of touch allows this fluidity to begin to show itself and move, because you don't just hear the space that your hands are touching. You can begin to get a sense of the whole body. And that's the piece of wholeness that always, so, one of the things I know in teaching Rolfers in different workshops is that there can be such an over focus on a minutia, on a part. And that's fine to have that understanding of the part, but at the same time, perceptually, to allow your awareness, your perception, to hold the whole of them. Okay, I'm at their shoulder joint, but I'm also aware of their whole body. Or I'm working with their neck, but I'm also sensing the entire back body. Because they're on their back. I look and I see the front of their body. I can see their sides. But to remember, just in my own awareness, back body. And this is where one of my wonderful colleagues, our colleagues, Hiro Tahata from Japan. I've taught in Japan many times, and Hiro is just a wonderful practitioner. You may want to invite him to talk too at some point. He does speak English. And he, from a very, very early movement training that I did with Rebecca Carley Mills in Washington, D.C., Hiro was there. And we worked with this concept of yield. Yield is also a way for you to work with the umbilical hernia. So when you yield, what do you do? But you rest. It is not a passive movement. It's an active coming into relationship. I rest into the table. I yield into the table, but I'm aware I'm not just becoming a noodle. So yield, and he has worked with yield. You'll see his work on Facebook with really dropping people into these deeper places. For example, with L3, L4 in your body and what's going on with the umbilicus, yielding those vertebrae back may also help to drop the hernia back, to keep reforming it. Oh yeah, it belongs back here, not coming forward. So all of that, the listening, the helping someone yield on the table. 3 of the questions I'll ask if they come in and they've just driven off the highway and they've been late. They're late and they want to get their session. Are you lying on the table? Are you lying above the table? Or are you sinking into the table? And I want them to sink. So I also have a Tempur-Pedic foam pad, a memory foam pad on my table. So they sink, rest into themselves, especially in these chaotic times. Remembering our back space is really important. I'm not just out in front managing everything that's coming at me, the assaults of everything, but I'm able to rest back. All of that begins to allow the fluidity of the body, which is also its wholeness, to come to the fore. Fluid body, connected body. When you think of fluid, there are no boundaries. Things move in a way. You have structure, but you also have movement, fluidity. They go hand in hand. As a practitioner, learning to shift your perception to hold the whole, whether you're working on their toe, you're working on their arm, you're working on their spine, you hold the whole of them as you come into contact. And people feel the difference.
Yeah, I was fortunate that I had Ray as my phase 3, and he talked a lot about that. I don't think at the time I don't think I could fully understand it, and I don't know if his intent was to have us to understand it at that moment as much as planting a seed. Yeah. And when I started studying the biodynamic cranial sacral, because I too had studied up ledger before, and I liked. I'm maybe a little more cerebral, so I like the step by step, but it kind of felt invasive. And I had a friend who was biodynamic teacher, and we would talk about stuff, and I didn't know biodynamics, and I was figuring aspects of biodynamics out on myself and playing around with it, but still very much me being in control. So when I started to study more of the biodynamic approach, and very much like one of the things Ray would have us do would be, feeling into the room, feeling out to, the outside the building, all of that stuff. And when I would bring that into the biodynamic approach, and then later into SI, and I'd love to hear maybe later about how you sort of integrate the two in together. But the amazing part of it is just letting the person on the table feel welcome, as opposed to feeling like, oh, you're looking at me. It's like, and I guess that ties into the yield, which very like karmically, yield is what I've been playing with for the last 2 weeks. I've been doing some Bonnie Bainbridge Cohen stuff, and really about yield. Interestingly, like I'm on the ground, but I can't let go of this. Like I'm trying to, but I can't. Okay, let's move. Let's figure that out more. Really, just amazing.
I'll send you an article Hero and I wrote about yield, and it's in an early journal. But go ahead. And so when you find that space where it's holding and you begin to investigate yield in your own body, how do you do that?
I think that one of the best ways is to find a biodynamic cranial practitioner and work with them. But in this day of age of COVID, that doesn't work so well. Although I have some friends who've been working on distance with that. But I had been playing a lot with, I'd been doing a bunch of Feldenkrais, and then I was kind of finding other movement ways out. And then I recently had found a teacher that Nikki had introduced me to, who we had on before, Kayla June. And she was able to sort of give me a little bit more guidance. But a lot of it is a lot of sort of slow rolling and moving and tuning in and seeing like, oh, okay, is this fluid or is it not? If I'm at rest, am I at rest? If I'm on my back, is my stomach going to the ceiling? Is it going to the floor? Is it going to the sides? What is happening in? And so it's, some of it might be body scans and some of it may just, or if I turn to the side, it feels like I'm getting hooked a little bit. Well, where is that? Why is that? And how can I let that? Does that need to be there? Does it not? How can I allow it to change if it wants to? And what I want and what my body wants may not always be in tune.
Well, it's really important to make the distinction between, am I thinking yield? Or do I have the sensory experience of yield in my body? And I have to say that Hubert Goudard, who I studied with just a little bit, but he was wonderful. And he talked about weight. And so weight in the bones especially is really great to bring into any exploration of yield, because the weight will also take you there. And weight and reach.
Yeah, before I was a Rolfer, I'd studied various forms of yoga nidra as a yogi. Yeah. And so I was bringing in aspects of that and bringing in weights and bringing in felt sensing. So what does this feel like? How does that feel into my practice? And later I found that that's incorporated a lot in Rolf movement and other stuff. I didn't know that at the time, but I find a lot of that is really helpful. But you make a great point, which is it the mind or not? Like, is my mind? And that's, I'm from New England. I'm very in my mind a lot. It's taken me, and so getting out of the mind and getting into the body has been.
Oh, it's a lifelong journey.
Good.
It is. Some days you're there and some days you're not. But that question, am I thinking this feeling or am I sensing? And that's the real challenge, I think, for whoever we're working with, including ourselves. Am I thinking the concept of yield, or am I experiencing, sensing my body drop into the support of what I'm sitting on?
Yeah. And I think you guys gave great examples. And one I wanted to add, just in case, we have some listeners that are dancing between this two, I think also titrating through movement, that you can do this dance of I'm really thinking about the movement. And then as I come out of it, balance, feeling into that yield, and then keeping moving in between a particular movement that you might feel stuck in. And as you play with that, you will start to that the yielding is the softening and feeling less segments and feeling more fluid.
And remember, yield is active. It's an active perception. It's an active feeling. It's like when you come to a yield sign when you're driving, you don't go to sleep. You literally pay attention. So that's I always want to say, no, it's not becoming, spaghetti noodles, overcooked spaghetti. It's about paying attention. And
I love that yield traffic analogy, because we can all relate to that, whether we're super somatic nerds or just regular old people. That's what yield is.
That's what you
I'm from Massachusetts. We don't follow signs in the street when driving.
Excuses. Anyway, so fluidity. It's beautiful. It's wholeness. The body is fluid.
So, Carol, this has all been so really yummy, and the explanation of the different ways of working and structural integration. But I'm curious how we can bring this back to what we were talking about in the beginning of how does this work? How do we bring this work into more of a multiple world of just not for the white people, taught by the white people?
Well, that's what's so beautiful about this group. We began as Antiracism, SI for Antiracism Somatics, this group of 8. And that's exactly the question we're asking. And how do you bring this into the world? Because, it's how we make our living. So how do you charge in that's appropriate to different economic classes, okay? And what I would like every person to read or to listen to on Audible is a book by Isabel Wilkerson called Caste. And in that book, she talks about the caste system as the basis of the racism, the economic caste, and how that's where reparations for people of color becomes really an important topic. But I truly believe that in her writing in this book, and by reading it as a white person, and I grew up in Detroit, so I grew up in the riots, and I grew up near the projects. I have been exposed to the poverty. I had went to a Catholic high school, grade school, great high school, and one of the sisters I had, Sister Donna Nickel, who also told me about Rolfing after she left the convent. She wrote me this letter and said, I'm doing this very intense work. It's called Rolfing. Well, I went to the Detroit library and tried to find it because when you're a kid, a teenager, I'm looking for intense. I want real. But she used to take us down to the inner city of Detroit and we would clean homes. It was kind of like Vista volunteers in high school. So there is that paucity in having more students of color in the Rolfing Institute, in other institutes of bodywork, is very important, and that's what we're looking at in this group. Isabel Wilkerson's book, Caste, reading it, puts you in their shoes. What is the culture they've grown up with? And if you are into NBA basketball at all, it's amazing to hear Jaylen Brown, LeBron James, Marcus Smart talk about how when they were children, they would run and hide when they saw a white policeman coming, because they knew they weren't safe. So how does that information, and Isabel Wilkerson goes into this in her book, you will be touched beyond with the culture of fear that is imposed by this white colonial mindset onto the black person, the black-skinned person, from lynching to I can drive, I can be in a car, I can be stopped by a policeman. I'm not afraid he's going to shoot me. But when you listen to these black athletes talk about the fear they have for their children and how they speak to them about do not fight them, just go with what's going on, Do not stand up. Do not engage in any kind of resistance. You know that Black men are killed more than white.
Yeah.
So
Yep. I'm fortunate. I met a woman at our neighborhood pool recently, and her husband, both white professors in a southern state. I'm kind of censoring for confidentiality, but pretty Ivy League school in the southern states. And they adopted a child, a Black boy, who is kind of coming of age of teenager, and he is autistic. And they left the South and moved to Boulder, where I live, because they were starting to get concern of how their son is going to be treated and how it was becoming unsafe, that not only being Black, but then having differences with being autistic, that this poor kid who, was just wanting to walk down his neighborhood is being called names, being spit on. And this is now, here last year. Yeah. And they're in a highly educated community in the South.
Yes.
And, Boulder, it was an interesting conversation. I was like, because I grew up in Memphis, so I'm aware of the demographic diversity in a way of the diversity there. And I was like, well, how is it coming into a very white town? And she was like, it still has its differences, but in a way, we don't fear our child's life. Yes. There might still be, it still might be very white here, and it has its own issues with lack of color. But he started speaking. He was nonverbal before, and I think he's what did she say? 14 years old. So nonverbal all the way from 14 years. And then after 6 months being in Boulder, was at a school that was a little better equipped to work with kids with autistic needs, became verbal and was able to communicate.
Yeah.
So it's a very interesting conversation, because I'm coming from, I had a big part of my career was in New York City, and I know a Black acupuncturist. I know it's just so interesting how this, and I'm not 100% not denying that there's racism within this wellness culture, but I'm just holding these thoughts of how some people are exposed to it and are professionals in the world and work with a lot of different people. And then there's these pockets throughout the United States where it is so white and segregated.
That's right. But I think in order to start really deconstructing and opening to other culture, whatever culture it is, that we have to understand the depth of what they've been through and what they are continuing to have to deal with. And literally her book just took me into those places of understanding on a very sensory level. And at the same time, looking at how the roots of white colonialism have, being white, having the privilege we have to study what we've had, to earn money at what we love to do. We didn't have to go and just be secretaries. We got to find this work of touching that we love and using it to grow ourselves. But I also have to acknowledge what's inside of me and turn over those little rocks that are really deep, the moss underneath with the bugs, about what is the imprint I received in my own growing up, being in white skin.
Yep. I listened to the White Fragility, and that was
right.
It was hard because I had to sit with kind of what you're saying of what came with me without, because in my heart, in the way I've oriented in the world, I haven't felt racist, but then I was like, wait a minute, that's not good enough. Like, there's something else. I have to dig deeper. And it was hard to hear, because I had to acknowledge of like my privilege that, and that I have, how that's created so much harm to other people.
And Nikki, that's the first step, is to realize how much privilege we've had just because of the luck of the skin color and what came our way because of that.
I had that realization a lot longer before this even blew up, because I spent so much time in Asia, and it was like I had places where I had someone stop me. Where was I? I was in Taiwan, and ask if I wanted to be, I'm not even joking, like the campaign spokesperson for a company. Because I was white, and they wanted a white person for that. My girlfriend is Chinese, and she's a teacher, and where she is, the white people are paid more, but they're paid more because it's their native tongue. But some of those people aren't better teachers than my girlfriend's a great teacher. She's one of the best they have. She will not make, in that position, she will not make, and it's slightly different because it's language, but still, like, if you were to look at shareability, she won't make that. Yeah, it's like you said, it's been very difficult. I have a lot of friends of all different nationalities. I've worked in the Caribbean. I've worked a lot in Asia and the Middle East, of people of non-white skin tone. And I had a good friend I've known for 20 years. And when this was all kicking off, like in April or May, we had a talk, and similar. He was driving from one new home to a new old home to a new home. And he had to keep his license on the seat out of fear of being shot looking for a license. And I never thought about that in regards to myself, but also in regards to anyone else, especially this friend who, to even think, how would anyone, he's such a nice, kind, sweet guy. Why would anyone ever think? But that's the reality of his life.
Yes. So I believe that by really understanding the reality of another culture and how this white culture has really put itself at the top, across from England, the Puritans that came over, that was the accepted culture. So I'm really interested right now and because of this group that has been so beautiful to be with, deconstructing this white colonial imprint, understanding as you read, like the book Caste, and step into these shoes of a black culture, and feeling where that horror is within my own system or in my field. It's a real important piece to begin to own. And in owning that and knowing that will begin to diversify my own engagement with different cultures. I mean, I love the Japanese culture. I've spent a lot of time there, and the Latino culture and the Black culture. So how do I keep increasing that kind of communication between?
Yeah. History. So when we're looking at you, me, anyone else can say, well, I haven't had this at that point. I'm not racist, or I'm not this, but then going back to your grandmother, right, of which we are genetically tied embryologically to, and not saying that either of your grandmothers were racist, but other people, and the sign of the times, what was going on at the time, which may not have seen. Our grandparents would have had separate drinking fountains. That wouldn't necessarily have maybe seen racist. That was just what happened, or that's how they possibly could perceive it. But that whole thought process is all going on within them on a cellular level, of which is getting passed down to you. And so how do we also clear this historical cellular?
That's exactly right. And that's the cultural imprint that we aren't, but you're naming it beautifully. Andrew, because that's the
Rarely does anyone say that about anything I say, but I'll take that.
Really, truly, because you took it back through a lineage and in the cellular imprint. And one of the men in this group was talking about, he was working with a Black man in the Rolfing series, and he came to the throat, and how beautiful the session must have felt, so safe. This man began to talk about the fear of lynching, which is, so you see, as I understand, that's this fear that's resonated through their culture from the time they were brought over on the ships and the South, and then the Civil War. And it allows me to also look inside myself. So you start getting this understanding about our humanness and about what we carry. And sometimes it's on a cellular level. And I had somebody tell me, well, I don't see color. I only see the person. And I thought, and I felt very bad about that, because I see color. I see ethnicity. In Detroit, you grew up with all kinds of ethnic groups. So my friend, Don Johnson, recommended this book, Diverse Bodies, Diverse Practices, of which he is an editor. And in one of the stories written by a Black woman, she talks about people who don't see color, who say they don't see color. And it was so it touched my heart that she said, if you don't see color and you just erase it all like, oh, it's still, I don't see color, I don't see color, it denies the history that a person of color has experienced. And I thought, wow, this is profound, because when I see a person of color, a Black man, a Black woman, a Black child, I know that cellular history you're talking about is there. It has come through their grandmothers. It has come through their fathers. Okay. And I see that and I can experience it.
Well, and I would say that not seeing color would be boring, and that we should be seeing color and respecting everybody's color and everybody's. And I know the Black. I understand that Black Lives Matter, and I'm not diminishing that whatsoever. But just in the greater picture of it is that we should all be respected for our culture. I mean, that's what makes this world rich, and we should be celebrating it and not be fearing it and judging it, and see what we can learn with how other people eat, how other people live, how other people dance. I mean, come on, we're through the whole movement. I mean, there's so many stories in the way people move through this world, and
yes,
and celebrate that.
And
but
celebrate it.
Yeah,
the diversity.
The diversity.
And it's like when I look at, there's a movement that goes through the sternum that's front to back. And we don't actually have that in our white culture. There's like this, but so practicing that just sternal movement and allowing our hearts to rest in the back rather than being up front and all that. It's like having them rest. What a different experience it is in our bodies. So
hey, when I lived in New York, I went to so many African dance, ballroom dance, and I feel like I mean, clearly I like to dance because I wanted to get into these studios, and when I'm dancing by myself, I feel like I find my rhythm. But when I'm comparing, seeing like with these other cultures, oh my gosh, when I tried to be in an African dance, it was like white girl shined, and not in the way that you would imagine. The undulation, it just
is not there.
Is not there. And same with like the Latin culture of like, I mean, I spent so many times, and I mean, it was great being able to be embraced by, again, so many cultures that are willing to dance with me because, you know, talking about mirror neurons, like enough people were willing to, to dance with me. And eventually I got there and I started, it was, and to feel into those movements and to feel into that cultural celebration of the music that was being played, it felt so good. And yeah, it,
Yeah.
I really understand.
So, yeah, so all of that movement and diversity, they're finding that diversity in groups, white, Black, Latino, Asian, women, men, LGBTQ, you know, all of that. The more diverse a group is, the more creative it can be. The more creativity is sparked because you're coming from so many different places in your understanding of the world. It's not just one legislated white.
And I would like to add to that, when you are open to diversity, you're opening up your heart. And so with that, you have greater love, greater capacity for love, greater ability to see through differences. And when you can hold all that, and, you know, you can be different and not agree. And when you're holding in that type of community, you lash out and want to lynch somebody, or all the horrific hate crimes that happen, because it's like, it's so hard for me to understand these degree of hate crimes that happen. Granted, I understand that maybe some of that is some mental illness, but I also, and I recognize that of those imbalances, but then there is, and I don't also want to just like write it off, oh, they have a mental imbalance. No, some of these people are downright cruel and hateful and need to be corrected.
That's right.
Because no one deserves to be treated that way. Race, gender, demographic, poor, rich. I mean,
but in order to correct someone, and in order for someone to be open to learn from diversity, they have to be open. You can correct someone as much as you want. If they don't want to hear it, they're not going to be corrected. They're not going to receive it because they're not at that point. And similar, like, I mean, unfortunately, we're all probably like-minded, so we can go around and talk about the beauty and the great. And the three of us, I'm going to guess, want to have our flaws pointed out as ways to improve ourselves. So, you know, and people in our mindset are like, oh, okay, like, let me hear what I didn't do so I can change it. But the person doing the hate crime, most likely, I mean, I can't speak for them. A lot of them, I mean, some may not recognize fully what they're doing, but a lot are not. They're in their belief systems, and belief systems are really hard to change. If people, you know, your belief system essentially is your psychological foundation for the world around you. And for some people, trying to change that is taking the rug out. They have built, or have been built for them, a very comfortable phenomenological reality of the world, and to change that would mean they're not safe. And even if their safety is providing unsafety for others, they may not want to change that. Us three, I would gather, are like, oh, I did something that wasn't safe for someone. Okay, thanks for telling me. Let me go and correct that. And so it's hard for us to like not understand why. It's hard for us to understand someone like Donald Trump. Like, he's the most obvious person, I know that, but it's hard to understand because it's like the exact opposite of almost everything we would possibly believe. If you said to him, hey, what you're doing is wrong, he's going to say, I don't care. Like, I don't care what you say, you know?
Yeah, but I think the point being made is that when we all, even in our little micro groups, start to recognize that exactly what you're saying, to open up our bubble in becoming, in seeking out diversity, whether maybe you're comfortable in your own world and don't see the need to change, but if you're really wanting to make change for the greater good, seeking out the diversity, even if it's not something you necessarily thought about before in your need, because the more we get that way, then other people can start seeing how there's not a threat in it.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what you're both saying about the heart is so important. It's about love. It's about, and not romantic love. It's just unconditional, positive regard for another human being. And how are they being treated, and caring on that level about the treatment of different people. Treatment. Heart.
I know I'm still working on that on myself, clearing my own blind spots. Grateful that I have teachers who can show me the way, and teachers are everyone. I'm currently staying with a friend in Vermont who is LGBTQA community, and I'm just learning. I thought I knew a lot, but I'm learning new stuff every day. And some days she'll sort of be like, "Was I too hard on you?" I'm like, "No, this is great. Like, this is helping me not be worse later on. So keep laying it down, dude."
Thank you. Teach me.
Yeah, teach me.
Teach me. No, that's great. That's really great. It is diversity, kindness, heart.
Well, Carol, I think it's awesome kind of just talking about from the history of structural integration being founded by Ida, founded by a woman, but kind of turned into a man's world. Then you were kind of in it when women were starting to become the teachers. Then this whole middle juiciness of integrating the different modalities of really feeling into the body, creating differentiation without being biased to a tissue or fluid, just kind of holding it all together. Mm-hmm. And then now being invited with this unique group. I can't wait to hear more. I know some of these people was not aware of what they're doing.
Yeah.
So can't wait to hear more of what's that to turn into and how that is going to
evolve. Well, when we launch, we're going to do a soft launch of the website and also this whole place where you can blog and discuss. I'll send both of you an invitation.
Oh, thank you.
Because it's really, it'll be exciting. We don't know where it's going to go. And one of the people in it is actually a professor of dance, and he lives in Minnesota, but is connected with a university in Maryland. And he's really looking at this too so it's about movement. How do we move this? And how do we get our hearts moving in these ways that give us this kind of motion? That's because I think that's all part of the opening, moving differently in our lives.
A lot of what I say is meant with good intentions. It doesn't always receive that way. Ida was sometimes referred to as this white witch in the best of ways. I know witch can have a negative connotation, but in sort of this mysterious, wonderful, powerful woman with white hair. And I have a feeling in the best of ways, you are also just a white witch that can just sort of see and do and just shift things so easily with people. And so I want to... Yeah.
But thank you. It's like, yes, white hair does serve a purpose.
For people listening here, we'll share your website, but are you teaching anything? Do you have any plans for teaching? Are you still
waiting for COVID to stop mutating? Mm-hmm. Because there was just an article about how COVID, because nobody is wearing masks, social distancing, there's a lot of people who aren't doing that. COVID is actually mutating faster. So Ray and I will be offering at some point another foundational cranial training. I also teach just embryological trainings where you get to go into the movement and these different movements and formations, how the arms form. very fascinating,
Oh, that sounds amazing.
from the heart, which come from the heart. It's all growing out. And but that's kind of, I think we're just in a limbo right now. And especially until after this election, things are just kind of on hold. But I will be teaching again. Or in fact, in March, I was in Boulder. COVID was just starting to come out. Ray and I canceled the class. We all flew home. And now we're waiting to resume. It's interrupted a lot of our lives. But we also have an election coming up.
Well, we'll post your website so people can find out more when you are teaching and what's going on with you.
More up there eventually. Yeah. So I actually have to go and see a client, but it's been wonderful. Thank you so much for
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good client session.
Okay. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Bye, Carol.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to us at Touching Into Presence. We hope you enjoyed today's conversation. You can find out more about Carol at holographictouch.com. If you enjoyed today's episode, we'd appreciate it if you would leave a positive review of the podcast and subscribe to it through the platform of your choice. When you do this, it really helps other people find this, and we greatly appreciate your support. We look forward to hearing back from you and seeing you on our next conversation at Touching Into Presence. Bye-bye.